Hey everybody, thank you very much for joining us this evening for our third Percussion Community Webinar of the season. My name is Caleb Rothy. I'm the Percussion Education Coordinator for WGI Sport of the Arts. And our special guest this evening is none other than Hall of Famer Don Click. Don, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So Don and I are going to be talking about a whole bunch of things. His process in terms of design and concepts and programming. But we'll also be talking a little bit about just mid-season flow. What are the things that he's talking to his ensembles about during this time of the year and things like that. Of course, we want to make sure that this webinar is working great for everybody that's attending. So those that are tuning in live tonight, we hope that you will get involved in this. If at any point you have any questions at all, just type them in there into the question field, and Don and I will answer those as they come to us. If you already have a question in mind, there's no need to wait until the end of the webinar. We can do kind of Q&A live as we're going through everything. So don't hold back. Feel free to type in anything that's on your mind at any point. Don's got a wealth of knowledge and experience in this activity, so we want to make sure that we're able to get to all of the questions that anybody may have for him or also for myself. So that's kind of the routine. Couple of controls here. Feel free to use that question tool to be able to shoot us any questions, and then we'll just kind of take them and answer them live in the webinar. If you are tuning in to see a recorded copy of this, just a reminder, we do these things live on Thursday nights throughout the course of the season. If you can mark your calendar for some of those and make sure to tune us live, that would be great. But if not, if you ever have a question, you can also email those in ahead of time and just shoot that note to me, and we'll make sure that we ask it on air, even if you're not able to join us live. All right, so Don, once again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. You've been a guest that I wanted to have here on this webinar for quite some time so that you and I can dive into all the things that we're passionate about in this activity. Before we get going, I know many are already going to know you by name and reputation, but if you wouldn't mind giving us a little rundown of your bio and your history in the activity, because many probably know you from Mystique, but may not know all of the different hats that you've worn in the activity and kind of your history in it and how you got started. So if you wouldn't mind giving us a quick little rundown, I'm sure everybody that's attending would love to know all those things.
Sure. Well, I started out in marching band just like we all did, and went to college and ended up graduating from North Texas and in the December of '93, and then moved back to my hometown, which was Nashville, in '94. Fall of '94, late summer, early fall, we started talking about this whole indoor WGI thing, since it was only 2 years old at that point, and that's when we decided to start with Mystique. So we started Mystique. Our first year competing was in '95, so this is our 25th anniversary, actually, so that's kind of cool. And then from there, it just kind of blossomed. The board of directors of WGI was reorganized probably around 7 or 8 years after I started in the activity. And prior to that, it was strictly color guard people that were on the board of directors. They decided to reorganize and recognize the percussion division, this new division that was exploding. And so I was lucky enough to be one of 2 people chosen by the Percussive Advisory Board to be on the board of directors. And from there, the board of directors chose me to be on the executive board. So I've actually, all but maybe 2 years, I've been on the board of directors and the advisory board for the past, I think it's been 17 or 18 years, I don't remember, but it's been a long time. So, and then I was director of Mystique for the first 12 or 13 years. And that's when Josh Nelson and I kind of overlapped for 1 year, and then I bowed out and he became director, running all the day-to-day. I'm still on the board of directors, still on the design team of Mystique, have been heavily involved pretty much the entire time. There was 1 year, the first year that I was out, I kind of stepped back and needed to focus on my family here in Texas and get going, and I'd just show up, a couple shows here and there, of course, all finals week, but that's when the new crew at Mystique took over, and they just ran with it and did a phenomenal job. So, and then the next year I got more involved, and have been involved ever since. Once I moved down here to Texas, I started working with other groups as well. When you're director of an independent world group, it's very difficult, as you can imagine, to teach or work with any other groups. So once I moved down here to Texas, that kind of opened the door, and I joined Dusty Norris at Clearbrook High School pretty much as soon as I got down here, and we've been kind of a team ever since. So that's been 12 years. 12 or 13 years we've been going at it. So there's that. I've done all kinds of different high schools and independent groups. I've actually taught or designed in every class, with the exception of Independent A. I've not done Independent A. And currently I'm working with several schools, Scholastic Open, 2 independent world groups. I program for Monarch here in Houston, and Boswell over in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Cy Falls here in Houston, Clearbrook here in Houston. Last year, I actually had a few more groups. Last year, I had 8 groups, and it was pretty difficult. So I had to drop off a couple of those. 8 of them, I had 8 groups. 7 went to World Championships, and 6 of them made finals. So I was very happy with that. And of course, Clearbrook won the Scholastic Open class. So was very happy about that as well. So it was a good season, but it about killed me, as you can imagine. So I cut back on a couple of the groups this year. So I'm only doing, I think, 5 or 6 this year. So that's been my involvement. Like I said, I've been on the board of directors. I'm currently the treasurer of WGI, advisory board. I'm at the board meeting. I've been at the board meeting every single year that there's been a percussive advisory board. The very first year, funny little story, in 1995, our advisory board meeting was actually held at the headquarters hotel in Dayton at 8 a.m. on Sunday morning after finals. It was brutal, and there were only about 8 of us there. I don't think I went to sleep, so I just crawled right into the meeting. But there were about 8 or 10 of us, so it's come a long way since then. And so that's kind of my involvement in the group. Of course, I do a lot of stuff in the fall and do stuff with drum corps. I'm the program coordinator for the Colts during the summer, and several marching bands. I kind of stick local for my marching bands just because I like to get hands-on and get my feet dirty out on the field. So most of those are in Houston. But so that's kind of what I do as far as the activity goes. And then I'm also in the industry. Most of you know that I've worked for Pearl Drums in the past. I've worked for ProMark Sticks, and then D'Addario purchased ProMark, and then I was with D'Addario, with Evans and ProMark, and Real Field practice pads and all that stuff. And then currently I'm the vice president of marketing for System Blue. So I'm pretty deep in this entire activity, as you can see.
You share about the early advisory board meetings back in 1995. It's so crazy to think about how everything has grown and evolved and taken off since then.
It's pretty interesting. I remember distinctively sitting in the Nutter Center, and those first couple of years, we would actually alternate Independent World and Scholastic World, who went on last on Saturday night. So we would flip back and forth. And so one of those years where Independent World went first and then Scholastic World, I was sitting in the audience just like everybody else watching Scholastic World, and we were in the Nutter Center, and the stands were maybe halfway full, if that. There were plenty of seats. You could find a seat anywhere. And so, it's a little bit different now. Yeah,
it's awesome and tremendous, and pinch myself every day just how lucky we are to be in the activity in the time that we are right now.
Yeah.
Hey, so Don, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about tonight was a bit about ideas and concepts and design and stuff like that, because I've always admired the variety of work that you've done in the activity. And so I kind of wanted to tap in a little bit into your process and into your approach, just your philosophy behind some of these things, and maybe share it with some of the younger designers and aspiring designers that are checking out the webinar. So I'd love to kind of talk about ideas first, if we can. I'm wondering, you work with a lot of ensembles. You either design for them directly or you consult for them as part of a larger design team. And you do this at a very high level every year. You mentioned you had 8 groups last year, 7 that were at World Championships. That's a lot of original ideas that need to take the floor and need to kind of bloom and be their own independent thing. How do you manage to unearth so many different ideas and concepts each year and feel like you're not running out, especially considering how long you've been involved in the activity at such a high level? Where does all that come from? What is kind of your spring or your well to get those ideas to come to the forefront?
Well, multiple places, to be honest. And the thing about inspiration or creativity, if you want to call it that, that's not a moment in time. That's over the course of time. So when you come up with ideas and you're trying to be creative, it's really just a collection of experiences that you've had throughout your entire life. And it's taking those experiences and molding them and sculpting them into something that's usable now. That doesn't say that I always search out inspiration, because I do. I search out inspiration 24/7 all the time, not just, okay, I've got to come up with a show by next week. I don't really do that. It's kind of an ever evolving thing. I do keep a list of things that interest me. I've been keeping this list for almost 20 years. It started out, to be honest, in WordPerfect. And so I printed it out on my dot matrix printer and would have my sheets of paper that I would go through. Now, of course, it's digital. I've got it on my phone. So there'll be times I'm walking through, say, a hotel lobby, and I see a color scheme that I love, and I'll just start snapping pictures. I may hear a poem, I may hear a song, I may hear something. My wife, Stephanie, laughs at me because we'll be somewhere. Like one year I was in a restaurant and I'm just looking around thinking, there's a show here somewhere. She's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, the color palette, there's a show. I don't know what it is, but this is just the first spark, So I came back like a week or two later and just started taking pictures, and so I save all those. And like I said, I've got this big list. Often I'll go to the bookstore and I'll just roam the aisles. I'll look at titles, I'll look at pictures, all that kind of stuff. Just anything that I can see in a bookstore. I'll sit in a bookstore for hours. I go to museums, right before Christmas, back in maybe November, when the season was just starting to go. I had to have a museum day, and I just went by myself and just roamed around all the different museums. Luckily, here in Houston, we've got a big museum district, so I just roamed. The Contemporary Museum, all the different stuff, world history types of museums, just anything that I could look at and see. Look at color palettes. Look at maybe there's a pile of sticks that's a piece of art. So I'll take pictures of it and think, if I ever do a show about sticks, or I need something that's very organic yet artistic, I may be able to use this. So I just collect all these ideas because, creativity is not necessarily something that's brand new. It's something that is done in a unique way. So, there's really no need to reinvent the word creativity for our activity. There's so much inspiration out there. It's funny, I often go to concerts just for the production value. People laugh. I've been to Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift just because I heard that the production value was off the chain, and it was. And so I'm popping pictures during this whole thing, during the whole concert. And I think there's just many, many places that you can get that inspiration from. And it can start from anywhere. I've had shows that started literally with the color palette. I've had shows that have started with one little idea, just one little visual thing that I thought could expand and build off of it somehow. But just walking down the street or driving down the road, there's signs. There's so much around us that you can draw inspiration from. So that's kind of what I do. It's not a single process. It's a lifelong collection of experiences, really.
And certainly a theme that we've heard from others too, that, you never know where inspiration is going to strike. You never know when you're going to get that idea. And Don, I love the idea of just kind of keeping a running list. Maybe it's not even organized. It's just things that have caught your eye or caught your ear. And then you go back to it when you're searching for something to pull a couple of disparate ideas together. Don, we did have one request to share that list out. I want to let everybody know Don would be happy to share his list. Cost is $10,000. So if you see him,
I'm not sharing that list. You're great.
Anyway, if you shoot him a hefty check, maybe 10's not going to get it done. But he'll listen. He's a businessman. He's a man of reason. So
we can chat. I got two kids about to go to college. There's a price and everything.
There we go. Don, I'm wondering, I love all of the sources where you can get ideas. I love that you're in a restaurant and you go, there's a show in here somewhere. I don't know where it is. I don't know what it is yet, but there's something that's calling to me. I'm wondering if we can pivot a little bit and talk about now, with so many ideas floating around and a list of so many artifacts of different conceptual nuggets or little stems that may turn into something else. When it comes time to actually start to put together a show and you go, okay, I need to take disparate ideas and I need to pick something and run with it, how do you decide which of those ideas will work? How do you decide which of those ideas won't work? Essentially, how are you going to pick what to run with and then what to discard or to junk or to revisit at some point down the road?
It really comes back to the unit. That's where it starts, because there are some groups that could handle certain types of shows. Some groups cannot handle certain types of shows. Some students or performers are drawn to certain genres, or, we want to do a fun show. That's what we want to do. So it's important that you kind of cater to what the group is. And I also, when I put together shows, I try to think about where they are in their development process. Some of them are at the very, very top. Some of them are just kind of, getting their feet. So it's really about that sort of thing of how this show is going to be, how the members are going to be affected by the show and how the show is going to be affected by the members. I think that's the first and foremost that you've got to do, because we've seen those groups where people will put on a show and the creative staff may have this wild harebrained idea. You can tell the kids are not buying it at all, and if they're not buying it, they're the ones that have to bring it to life. And if they're not into it and they're not on board, then you've done something wrong along the way. You've either picked the wrong show or you've presented it incorrectly to them, something like that. So I think the very first thing you have to do is cater your ideas to the group that you're working with. Then once you do that, you have to start big and then start working your way down, just like we do with any show. With say when we clean, you're not cleaning all the little micro phrases, the very first day they get the music. You're just trying to get the rhythms right. You're just trying to get the sticking right and all that stuff. It's the same thing with a show. So you think about the big picture first. What is the look and feel that we're going for? What is the overall, I'm not even going to use the word concept, but it's the feel. What am I going to feel as an audience member when I look at this show, when I see this production? Is it quirky? Is it going to make me think? Is it a narrative? Is it, all these different things that are at our disposal? What is it going to be? Then once I get that, I just start throwing ideas on a piece of paper and literally write them down. Just throw them out there. Silly or not, it's irrelevant. Just dump them all out there. Then you'll see things that will start to kind of bubble to the top. And then you start looking at, okay, this show, we can kind of put this show in maybe 4 or 5 little compartments. How are we going to connect these? Maybe we need to move number 2 and number 3. Let's switch them. Oh, that makes more sense. That feels better. And then you start kind of narrowing it down from there. And then you start getting into what kind of think about like theater. This is like act 1, act 2, act 3. Well, in act 1, there's scene 1, scene 2, 3, scene 3 sort of thing. How are you starting to do that? Also with that look and feel, then it's time to start thinking about color palettes. And it's time to start thinking about costuming and all that kind of stuff. So I usually put together like what I call a production synopsis, which is just basically, here is the idea of the show. I love the TV show, Boom Boom. What is that?
Law and Order?
Yeah, Law and Order. Love it. They always have little quotes in there. I think it's really neat that they do that. I also like the show, the other one where the FBI agents are on the airplane all the time.
Criminal Minds.
Criminal Minds. They do a really, really good job of putting poetry throughout the entire thing, or these little quotes when they come back from commercials. And that quote will set up the entire next scene, set up till the next commercial. So I like to do that on our production synopsis. I like to find a poem or a quote or something that you can read that and it gets you into a certain mindset. Then I start putting together mood boards. And it doesn't have to be exact costuming. It could be color palettes. It could be just looks and feels. And I just pull all these images together and plop them on one piece of paper. So you can really just get the mood and the feel of what the production is. And then, like I said, we start kind of narrowing down from there. And you just slowly narrow down and narrow down and narrow down until you've got a really good framework. And then sometimes, there's surprises along the way, and those are kind of the fun things. You weren't really, you start to really dig into it, and all of a sudden something just kind of blossoms, and you're like, oh, well, this is kind of cool. It's something that was totally unexpected. So you've got to be open for that. You've got to be also willing to throw away your favorite part. You can't be married to anything, because just because it's your favorite doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And we as designers owe it to our performers and to the students to do the right thing all the time with the production of the show. Whether we think it's right or not, you just have to kind of do that. So that's how I do things. I could sit here and talk about this all day long, because I'm very passionate about how that works. It's very soulful, and it's very emotional when I put a show together, because there's part of me in there. You know what I mean? So.
Absolutely. You mentioned something early on, and I'm glad you said it, about when you're trying to pick a concept and figure out what to run with, you think about the performers in the ensemble, the members, and you try to come up with something that's a good match for them. And that is so near and dear to my heart. We've talked a lot in these webinars and some of the other educational clips and articles and stuff we've been doing over the years about getting to know your performers and knowing the composition of your ensemble, not just their technical ability, not just musical strengths and visual strengths, but who are they as people, what motivates them, what inspires them. Get to know the identity and the personality of your ensemble. And I think that's really what Don's talking about here is once you get to know that core id of your group, basically, then that's going to allow you to find a concept or a program or even music or a visual idea or a costuming idea that's going to be a good fit for them. And Don, I'm sure it's the same way for you. Most of my favorite shows in the history of this activity are times where you can see that marriage between the performers and the conceptual vision for the presentation, and they become symbiotic and complementary through and through in every way.
Right, for sure. And it's the more that they trust you and you trust them, that marriage between the two, between the student and the teacher, or the designer and the student, really more than anything, once that starts to really gel, man, that's where it just totally takes off, because they'll do anything for you if they trust you. If you show that that there's trust there, that you really have their best interest in mind, they'll do anything you ask them to do. And it's the same thing. I'll do anything they ask me to do if I see them giving that 100% effort.
Yep.
So.
And I think we've both seen examples of the opposite in the activity, where you can tell that there's a educational staff or design staff that has been very precious about something and given it to their students. Like, I want this part of the show to be like this, and it's just not jiving with the students. There's no gel there. The book or the costuming or the conceptual vision is something that the members do not feel comfortable about. You can tell that it was designed for the designer's id and not that of the ensemble. And so, yeah, identifying that early and moving away from those kinds of attributes, so valuable and so important to everything we do.
Yeah. My goal is for them on finals night to be amazing. What I want them to have the most amazing experience. I want them to entertain the heck out of the audience. I want the audience to have an amazing experience. It's all about that interrelationship of performer and audience, and whatever I can do to facilitate that on that final night, that's my job.
Love it. Love it. Hey, Don, we've got one question here from Tommy. He's wondering, what means more, the eyes or the ears?
One doesn't prevail over the other as a general idea. There's different times that different things. There's times that you want to hear things. There's times you want to see things. There's times you want to see and hear things at the same time. Our activity right now is going through a very big moment of, I have to see everything that I hear. Do I personally agree with that? I don't know. That's personal opinions, but right now that is a big thing. So if you play or hear, I need to see. So there's that synergy between the two. So to say one is more important than the other, I don't think that's a fair statement. I think they have to work in marriage. There are times where I do want to see more than I hear. I do want to hear more than I see. Just like when you're, say, arranging for your pit, you can't say which is more important, the marimba or the vibe. Well, neither one of them are important. They work together. Sometimes I want to hear more marimba. Sometimes I want to hear more vibe. Sometimes I want to hear them together, or that interplay. And it's the same thing with music and visual.
Yeah. And sometimes there are parts of your show that are innately meant to be felt more than they're meant to be seen or heard necessarily. It's part of the soundscape that you weave. Did you hear everything? Did you hear the subtle tap on the concert bass drum? No. But if it was missing, something would have felt wrong about it. And really, I mean, the art of putting together a great show is to blend all those things together so that the feel is achieved. Sometimes there are visual attributes. It might be a staging thing. It might be a costuming thing. It might be a set design thing where, you know, a certain hue of color slightly changes the feel of the show. And if it was the same color but a different hue, it might have made the feel incorrect. So all of those things are incredibly important.
Yes.
Don, this kind of takes us, it was a nice segue into kind of the next question that I had for you. When you're designing a show, what comes first for you?
Are you talking music and visual?
I guess my question is kind of both of those things. Is there something that typically comes first for you? Does it vary based on every show? What in general, when you're starting, is because one of the toughest thing is that blank canvas that, gosh, we could do anything this year. Where do we get started with this? How do you usually get started?
Well, like I said, I go to that production synopsis. I try to find some kind of poem or something that kind of summarizes the feel of everything. And then it just depends. Like I said, sometimes it starts with the color palette. Sometimes it starts with a narrative. Maybe the show is a narrative. They're hard to do, but there's possibility to do that. Sometimes it's music. You know, I want to do a funk show this year. Whatever I'm doing, it's all going to be about funk. So let's figure out funk. Okay. Funk. Are we going to do a nightclub? Are we going to do a street scene? Are we going to do this? Are we going to do that? You know, so that particular item, start with the funk. I want to do a show about the color orange. Okay, so let's do everything with orange. Let's design. Now, what music feels like orange? Okay, we're going to use these poles and we're going to play them different shades of orange, and each shade means a different thing. So what is that thing? And how can we write music to show that there's a different thing for every piece of orange board that we've got there, whatever it happens to be? You know what I mean? So it could be, it depends. It depends on what the show is and kind of where that starting point. But like I said, that production synopsis, I'll work on that for 2 or 3 weeks. And sometimes I'll work on it for like 2-3 hours, and then I'll have to step away for a couple of days and just let things kind of incubate and then come back and dig in a little bit further. But that production synopsis for me is that's the end all be all for me. That's my blueprint for the entire show. And usually that includes, like I said, the mood board and all that stuff. So that's where we just start filling stuff in. And maybe it starts with the mood board. Then we go to the music. Maybe it starts with the music, or this, I like this song, I like this song, I like this song. I don't know what we're going to do with it, but is there something we can do with it? So I just start throwing it on the paper and then massage it from there.
I think for me, the biggest takeaway in everything that you just shared is that there's no one way to do it. And even for you that's been doing this for so long, you don't have a set way that you approach it every year, other than it starts with a synopsis and kind of mapping stuff out. We have to have a general game plan when we get started. But I think for those that are listening to this, one of the big takeaways here is to know that if music strikes you first, start with that. If a visual motif strikes you first, start with that. If you just come up with a mood that you want to establish or an environment that you want to kind of live in that show, start with that. It can be any one of those things.
Right. And something that's really important is it needs to be something that you like. I mean, it's funny because, you know, we live with these shows for months, almost a year. I mean, there's some shows that I've already starting to think about next year's, you know, so I'm already, you know, months ahead. And you have to like it. You have to like the music. You have to like the color palette. You have to like it because you're going to have to live with it.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I think is important too, is kind of look back on yourself and what do you like, or what is your staff like, or what are you into, that sort of thing, so that you don't get bored or frustrated and feel like it's hard work because you don't like what you're doing.
Absolutely. I think one of the other takeaways here is this idea of, if you're a designer and you feel like you're in a little bit of a rut, one of the things you can do to get out of that, if you know, the last 3 years, you're like, we just have to change it up. We got to go in a different direction. And the last 3 years you've started with music, start with something else the next year. Break it up.
It's been about maybe 15 years ago. I saw Michael Cesario gave a clinic at TMEA once, and I just wanted to go and listen to what he had to say. I thought it was going to be interesting. And he, in Texas bands, there's a lot of tradition, and he told them, he said, I want you to write down right now, pull out a piece of paper, write down the 10 things that your band is known for. 10 things. Write it down. Not what you think it's known for, but what it's really known for. So everybody did that, but he was like, okay, now that you've got that list, take 4 of them, get rid of them, and never do them again. And everybody was like, oh crap, but it kind of forces you to think about, okay, this is not working, or let's evolve without trying to be different for the sake of being different, because I've definitely seen that happen where you're trying to be different just for the sake of being different. And you can look at that shows and you're like, yeah, they're just trying too hard. You can see that it's very obvious. So it's almost like if you want to change, then change because you want to see change, not change because you think you have to change to stay relevant in the activity. You know what I mean? So that's another thing. Like you said, if you get into a rut and maybe it's time for a change, but don't change just because, I have to change now because I've done this for 2 years and now I have to change. Well, who says that? Do whatever you want. It's your program.
Well, and it also helps to think of your program as a living, evolving thing. Let's say you've done 2 shows that are kind of similar in a similar vein for the last 2 years. You don't have to change and go a different direction. What you do, though, is you have to look at it and go, okay, what's the next evolutionary step of this? Here's the road we've been down. Where can we go next as a destination? And sometimes that's enough to just kind of break it up.
Right. We didn't go from Alexander Graham Bell's first phone to the iPhone in one leap. That didn't happen. There were a lot of little steps along the way. So you can easily do that. Like I said, with your program, list 10 things, get rid of 4 of them. There you go. There's slight evolution.
Yep. Hey, Don, before we kind of wrap up the ideas part, I've got one final question for you, and we'll kind of do this as 2-part, but I'm wondering if you can share with us some of your philosophical differences when you're programming we'll start first with between each one of the classes, A, Open, and World, and if that is a different programmatic approach for you. And then I'd also love, since you've got a lot of experience in both scholastic and independent domains, to just pick your brain and figure out if those are approached differently by you at all. So if we could, one of the questions we got from one of the attendees was if you could talk a little bit about programming in each one of the classes and how you do that differently.
Mm-hmm. Well, first off, I don't think I've ever programmed a show to win. I don't think I've ever programmed a show to medal. I've never programmed a show to get in finals. I feel like if you're taking that step, then you're going to fail unless you win. And that's hard, So I hear people sometimes say that. I'm like, we're going to design the show so we can get in the finals. Or you'll hear a group that's been promoted and they're like, oh, well, now we've got to just redo everything. Well, no, you don't. Why do you have? You've already proven that you're ready for the next class. Why do you have to change everything? So that's the first thing I want to say. I've never. Do I like to win? Of course I do. Do I like to be successful? Of course I do. If this is a competitive activity. If it wasn't a competitive activity, we'd just all show up in the Walmart parking lot on Saturdays and play for each other and be done with it. But that's not the case. So there is some competition there, but I feel like it's more competing with the sheets and competing with the individual performers to be amazing. If you can convince and make every one of those performers amazing and the show's amazing, you're going to be successful whether you win or not. So that's the first thing that I want to talk about. The next thing is, yes, you do program slightly different for each, the A, Open, and World. And it's mostly, if I had to sum up one word, it's going to be layering, right? It's how many layers are there. If you look at the upper end of world class, either scholastic or independent, those guys are doing a lot of stuff. There are a lot of moving parts that the performers are responsible for. There are a lot of moving parts that the designers and the techs are responsible for, and the staff. So if you compare that to, say, an A class, there's not as many layers. So the overall concept of, yes, we have to have a show with a through line that makes sense, that's enjoyable to the audience. Yes, that is the case, whether it's A, Open, or World, irrelevant. but what you are asking of the performers steps up with each class, both from a design standpoint of what you're asking them to do, simultaneous responsibility, athleticism, musical nuance, et cetera, as well as what you're expecting them to perform, how they do it. Ultra clean versus clean, but you know what I mean? Top of A class is good. It's clean. Is it top of world class clean? No, it's not. It's just not. You know, so the quality of sound is not the same. It's just different. So yes, I do program different. I think a lot of people in A class try to be so esoteric sometimes because they see that in world class. I think that you lose some of the students. I think you lose them mentally and emotionally. I just feel like I watch some shows and they're doing the drum face, but maybe it's a show about, you know, the Holocaust or whatever. And it's like, wait a minute, this doesn't match. They're not buying into the show. They want to just play drums, you know, and you're trying to be all philosophical. Let's back up here. So A, open world, yes, different. Independent and scholastic, I don't think there's a whole lot of difference with the exception of skill set. I have worked with independent groups. They're not as talented or has as much depth in the show as scholastic groups in the same class. Say an independent open class versus a scholastic open class. You know, just because it's independent doesn't mean it has to be harder or bigger or whatever. I mean, our class structure is just set up based on how you're organized as a business. Scholastic, these kids just happen to come from the same school. Independent, these kids can come from any school or no school at all. That's really it. There's no difference in what is expected of the independent and scholastic classes. It's the same. So I think we need to remember that. At times, the independent may be a little bit more advanced just because of their age. But other than that, that's about it, you know, until you get to the upper end of world class. I think there's a little bit of difference there because most of the upper end of independent world, they're all college age guys. Most of them have marched drum corps. Most of them have marched top 12. There's just a different maturity level there. But, I mean, what these scholastic world kids are doing nowadays is phenomenal. So, you know, it's so I do not approach independent and scholastic differently. I think it's the same.
Great. That's really helpful advice, especially talking about, I love when you were talking about A, open and world, you talked about the raw skill sets for sure. You know, the skills asked of the performers and demonstrated by them, but also just conceptual layers as well. How deep and esoteric are we going to go? Well, the world-class level, I can go really far with this, and it can be a multifaceted approach to the triad of effect. In an A-class show and with an A-class ensemble and A-class performers, it's probably not doing them any benefit to ask that level of abstraction of them, and to give them something a little bit more concrete, a little bit more skill set appropriate would certainly be to every ensemble's advantage. And yeah, we see a handful of those every year. The open class group that is just a little bit too ambitious is trying to do too many world-class light things. Mm-hmm. And then also the A-class ensembles that haven't necessarily embraced that basic paradigm. It would certainly be helpful to... Yeah. Don, we had one other question that came in before we jump over to a couple of different topics for us. Says, do you think the design of the show and the talent of the members are equally as important in regards to ensemble success, or can one aspect make or break a group? What are your thoughts on that?
I think what the performer does has a little bit more emphasis than the design, by a little bit. I'd say 55-45. If the design is not good, then you're not giving them a palette to show their art. You're not giving them opportunities to display what they know how to do. So therefore, the design has to be good for that to happen. But at the same time, you can have the best design show out there, and if the students and if the performers are not handling their responsibility, that's a problem, you know, and you're not going to get rewarded for that. I mean, so yeah, that's a hard one. As a designer and as a teacher, I think I kind of struggle with that sometimes. But for me personally, I think it's a little bit more on the performer's shoulders than it is the design, but just by a little.
Yeah, and I think that
harmonious thing.
I think that 55-45 split is probably fairly realistic. I think it's important to remember when the announcement happens and the show's about to begin, the ones that are on the floor bringing it to life are always the performers. So for a designer, your contributions, your effort, your art, whatever it is always going to be received by the audience, received by the adjudicators through the performers bringing it to life. And so I think it's important to remember how important and indispensable the performers are to all of these presentations. But we've also seen the flip side, an incredibly well-trained ensemble with great musicians, great visual performers, and a written book and a program that does not show off their talents and does not give them an opportunity to shine can be equally debilitating. So I think it's really that marriage of those two things that becomes so crucial. And I think that's kind of what Don was touching on was this idea of, when those two things are symbiotic and are complementary through and through, that's the best thing for your ensemble.
For sure.
Don, I want to change gears a little bit and talk about some nuts and bolts, talk about maybe some management things just in terms of once you've picked a show, once you've got all the design and the creativity stuff, like how do we make this work? One of the things that I've always admired about you and that stood out to me is that you have worked with and consulted with groups that are both in your own backyard, but also spread around the country. And so I'm wondering, with so many different ensembles, so many different staff members and co-collaborators that you're working with, how do you manage all of that? How do you keep it all straight? Are there some productivity tools that you use that are kind of in your go-to bag? Just from an organization standpoint, how do you manage all of that and keep all of those projects on track?
It's a lot of spinning plates. I'm not going to lie. I was actually just talking about this tonight at a rehearsal that I work constantly. Constantly, because I do so many groups. So it's kind of a trade-off. If you're going to do that many groups, then you're going to have to put in the hours. There's no way of getting around that. I personally use Dropbox. I use Dropbox pretty much exclusively. I do have some teams that like Google Docs and all that stuff, all the Google applications. And then I've got one that likes Box.com. But any kind of file sharing like that, that's what I use to collect everything, and I get the whole team on there. Some teams are bigger than others. Most teams are spread all over. I don't know of really any teams that I work with where everybody lives in the same city. That's pretty rare. So most of the time we have, especially early on in the season, I'll have weekly conference calls with the design team. The 4 or 5 of us are, there's a couple of groups I work with. There's like 3 of us. So I'll have constant calls with them weekly. Sometimes we take breaks, but for the most part, almost every week we'll have those conference calls. I just personally keep a list. I handwrite everything because it helps me remember more, and I break it down. I've got just an 8.5 by 11 sheet, and every group and what I've got to accomplish that week. And then remember, I've got a day job. So I've got that is, important as well, that I've got to manage that. And then the way I write drill, I actually write drill on the fly. I don't use Pyware or anything. I write it in person. Unfortunately, that means I have to be there. So I'm at a rehearsal pretty much every night of the week, and every weekend I'm either flying somewhere to work with people, or I'm with rehearsals here in town pretty much every weekend. So, but my organization is Dropbox, and I've got the file structure in there, so that everybody knows what's going on, all the design team, and then constant phone calls. And with some of the larger groups, we have like coordinators, like a battery coordinator, front ensemble coordinator, visual coordinator, that sort of thing. And so I can contact them and work with them to accomplish the goals for that particular week. But most of it is just putting pencil to paper and just getting it done. Keeping a list, and like I said, keep those plates spinning, and once one starts to wobble, you try to jump over there. The idea is to not have any of them wobble. But right about now, it gets a little crazy. You know, in March, it starts to ramp up. It's interesting because I tell a lot of my staffs that I work with, and sometimes it's hard for people to grasp onto, but there's a process, you know, and my process of putting shows together, I don't start at the beginning and program everything perfectly as we learn it and fill it in as we learn it and all that. I don't work that way. I try to get that framework out there first, and then I go in and start adding stuff as I go. So luckily, when I do that, when we do it that way, it actually helps me from a design standpoint, because I can get pretty much most of the show out there, and then I can start looking at the big things I need to do. So as the season goes on, my focus per show gets narrower and narrower and narrower. And luckily, everybody's kind of in that same process for me. So I know that on, 1st of February, I'm starting to really put together production notes for all the teams of starting to really whittle down and what we do. So that helps me stay organized as well, because I'm kind of in the same point in the process with all of my groups.
And I'm sure that's a huge advantage for your performers too, because they spend the bulk of their season performing the whole show beginning to end. And yeah, maybe there are tweaks and there are additions and modifications throughout, but they don't get to the end of the season and have a closer that's only a week or two old in terms of being on the floor, because everything was detailed out horizontally as they kind of learned the whole process.
Right. Well, what's interesting, early season critiques are interesting, because they'll be like, well, you're just running around for 32 counts and you're not doing anything. Well, I know, fool, I hadn't filled it in yet, or they'll be like, well, you really need something here. Really, no joke. They're just standing still for 16 counts. I know. I've got that space there for that to happen. That comes later. So most of these guys have kind of learned me by now and kind of learned my process. So they're like, yeah, we know you're going to kind of thing. So.
You mentioned one of the things that you do is you use that just a regular sheet of notebook paper and a pen or a pencil. I know that probably works really well for you to keep everything organized. Do you take any of that stuff on that sheet and share that back with everybody on the team, or is that mostly just a tool for you?
Yeah, that's what we talk about on our conference calls.
Okay.
When we have those weekly conference calls, those are the big bullet points that we talk about. And then I'll shoot out responsibilities for each of the other designers or the caption heads or that sort of thing. Or if I've got like a co-director or somebody that I'm working with, or if I'm consulting, I'll send all that to the other director. And sometimes it's text, sometimes it's email, sometimes it's a phone call. It's just kind of whatever handy. I do a lot of work in the car, so sometimes I'll phone call people or text people. And because like those local groups I was telling you about, I'm about 45 minutes to an hour away from all of them. So I'm in the car. When I go to rehearsal, I've got at least 2 hours in the car. So that's when I'm listening to tapes. That's when I'm watching videos. That's when I'm, texting and taking notes and that sort of thing. So,
let's talk a little bit about right now, like the season right now. We're kind of if you're looking at the WGI calendar, we're kind of at the midpoint of the season right now. So I'm wondering, Don, what are the kinds of things that you're focusing on with your ensembles at this point in the season?
Right now, we've gotten all that framework that I told you about. That's pretty much done with everybody. I've got one school that I still have a closer to put on, but everybody else is already done with their shows. The framework is there. We have started to fill in the big spots. So I've filled in all the big spots. Now is when I'm really starting to work on any kind of smaller transitions. By now, I've done all of my pretty much big drill rewrites. I may go in and produce some things. Tonight at Clearbrook, right before this, I was there and we were finishing up this 32 count phrase that they were still just standing there. So we were producing that tonight. So all those big moments are almost done with most of my groups. And now we're starting to work in on the minutia, and some of the transitional type of things, some of okay, we've got this around it. And now we need to fill in just these little 6 counts right but in the middle. Like I was telling you, it's for me, I try to put the whole show on and then hit the big spots so that whenever the audience sees the show, they see a full production. It may not be filled in, but they at least see parts filled in because we've hit the big moments. And then, like I said, as you go on the show, it starts to get narrower and narrower and narrower. You know, the judges always kind of focus in the middle of the court early season. As the season goes on, their focus begins to expand. So now I'm to the point of, okay, we've got all this little stuff. And, little Susie, let's talk about how you're putting your bass drum down over here, because you've been putting it down, but now let's put that nuance to it. Because, like I said, the audience and the judges, as the season goes on, their focus expands. So now they're starting to look on all this stuff on the perimeters, or how are the mallets being brought up, and how is this happening, and how does that go back to the show. And we're doing a body visual here, but it is stock marching band. Can we make this body visual, can we tweak it a little bit to make it match more to what our character is, or to the look and the feel of the show at that particular moment?
I love it.
So it's kind of honing in on things now.
I know, Don, you're like me. You go to events every weekend and you're seeing a ton of groups, obviously warming up with your own groups, but as a super fan of the activity like I am and like so many of us are, I know you're in that gym trying to consume as many shows as possible. Do you have any advice, just from looking at lots of shows recently, any advice for instructors or designers out there at this point in the season? Basically, just something you observe, something that you're seeing that you wish people took into consideration a little bit more.
Clear out the clutter. Clear out the clutter. Everybody doesn't have to be playing all the time. So now that you've got the show on, you need to turn around and just listen to the show being performed. A lot of people get distracted by what's going on visually or what it's supposed to sound like, because that's what's on the MP3, but they may not be implementing that. And I see and hear a lot of groups that are just thick as all get out. And now's the time where you need to start pulling some of that crap out. Like I said, turn around, don't even watch, just listen and try to determine, what am I supposed to be listening to right now? I'm supposed to be listening to the snares, but little Johnny over here on the tenors is banging the crap out of the drums. Can we bring him down, or do we even need him? Can we cut him out? So the biggest thing is combing through things musically is the number one thing at this point, because the students will be able to grasp some of the visual concepts quicker than relearning the muscle memory in their hands later in the season.
And I think that's such great advice, because truly waiting another week or 2 weeks to start doing that does not give your performers enough time to adjust to those modifications, doesn't give you enough time as a staff member to really comb through the show and listen to everything and make sure that it has just the right ingredients in each one of those segments. So now is absolutely the time to jump on that, not the week before your circuit championships or something like that.
And the season's a week shorter this year.
It is.
So you've got to take that into consideration. Things that you normally do the second week of March, now you really need to be doing the first week of March.
Yep. We're all, unfortunately, we're all a week behind just because
Yes.
of the way the calendar lays out.
Right.
I'm wondering if we can talk for just a minute about competition. I'm wondering at this point in the season how competition kind of fits into your mindset. And when you're at rehearsal, do you talk about the competitive aspects? Do you not? What do you communicate to your performers about competition at this point in the season?
I don't talk about competition with any of my groups, other than the fact that if they go out and have a bad run, that's going to affect where they place. People are human. Kids and their parents want success. So the band moms and dads that are building props and trucking their kids all over the place, they want to win just like everybody else. They want the best for their kid. So we relate it to how well you perform, not necessarily you just got beat by your crosstown rival. Also, at this point of the season, excuse me, this is when usually I will bring out the sheets and I will actually talk through the sheets with the students. But up to now, it was useless because they wouldn't understand, especially the freshmen or new people. They just wouldn't understand. So now is usually when I start bringing out the sheets and talking about the sheets. And it's really funny because if I read through the sheets and talk about the boxes and we go through each one, I'm like, okay, where do you think we are? Oh, that we're probably upper box 3, low 4. And what was your score last week? Oh, it was upper box 3. Exactly. So all of a sudden they start putting 2 and 2 together and they start looking at this sheet and saying, I've got to do this always. Every single time I have to do this to get more points. If I do that, then we're going to be more successful. So they put the competition in their head, not by, I want to beat them, but I want to get more points so that I can be ahead of the game. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It's, it's understanding the grading rubric before you turn your essay in. How is this going to be evaluated? Yeah. You would never want a student that you're coaching or that you're tutoring or something like that to put in a ton of work and not know kind of what that answer key is supposed to look like. So I love that. And Don, I love that you don't focus on the competitive aspects right now, but you also don't totally ignore it. You talk to them about how they can take care of their own business, how they can account for more credit in the evaluation system. And then the success that parents and performers and staff members are looking for naturally flows from that. It's a byproduct of fulfilling all of those expectations in our curriculum on our adjudication seats.
Right. And from a scholastic point, that helps the parents, that helps them not think of, oh, well, the judges didn't like us. Oh, well, this is all political. This is just, oh, they like that. They like them better than us. That thing that we hear band parents say very, very often, it really kind of gets rid of that. So then all of a sudden you've got a little bit more buy-in from the parents rather than just, I want to win at all costs. We're going to beat our crosstown rival, that sort of thing.
So Don, those conversations about the sheets, I assumed at first you were doing that with the students. Are you saying you have those same kinds of conversations with the parent groups, with your scholastic ensembles?
Sometimes, not all the time. I have in the past, and a lot of times if parents come in and watch rehearsal, we'll talk about that sort of thing. We'll talk about the judges' sheets, and most of the time they're very curious, so most of those conversations happen casually and not necessarily in a formal setting. With the students, I sit them down. I sit them down on the bleachers, and we pull out the sheet, and we read through it, and we flip it over, and we talk about it, and we talk about where we are right now. And then here for the rest of the season, about once every week and a half, then we'll start talking about, okay, where are we in this box? Are we in upper box 4 now? Are we box 5 yet? That sort of thing. And that kind of gets their mindset into, we have to do this always.
And I've always found that such a great way to frame a repetition. You end every rehearsal with a full run of the show. And before you do it, to keep the students from just going through the motions and doing this thing that you've been practicing over and over again, you give them a couple of reminders about things that are on the sheet, things that the audience may be looking for or adjudicators may be looking for, and it gives them purpose as they're going through the run-through. Don't just try to execute the things that we've been cleaning and refining, but how are you going to make that connect and make that be purposeful with the audience and with the assessment criteria? That is so, so crucial.
Mm-hmm. And then we also talk about that our members, our performers are entertainers. We talk about that first and foremost, they're entertainers, and the people in the audience are paying to see them, and they deserve to get their money's worth, and that the judges that are putting the numbers down on the page are just audience members. They are affected the same way that grandma is. They're affected the same way that the person that this is the first time they're ever seeing this. They're affected the same way. And so, yes, you were in box 4. You want to get in box 5? Let's do this, this, and this, and make sure. And remember, you are here to entertain the audience. You are here to get them on their feet and clapping. That is your responsibility. Some people are entertained by clean rolls. Some people are entertained by seeing your emotion connected to the music through your face. Some people are entertained by this, that, and the other, whatever it is. But that is our number one job, first and foremost, is to entertain the audience.
I love it. Fantastic. Hey, Don, I think we're going to kind of wrap it up here for tonight. This has been a killer conversation with tons of great information. My last question for you is one of those kind of reflective questions. You've been in this activity for a long time and had a ton of different experiences and have learned a ton along the way. If you could go back in time and you could share something with the younger version of yourself that was involved in this activity 15, 20 years ago, what kind of advice would you have to impart to that younger version of yourself? What's something that you wish you knew earlier that your years of experience has kind of gained you now at this point?
There is, since day one, starting with Mystique, I've always been a program coordinator. I've put shows together. All 25 years I've been involved in this, sometimes with Mystique, sometimes with other groups. Early on, I was a program dictator. And then after a few years, I learned that It's less stressful. You get more creativity. You get more effort from everyone else if you're a program coordinator. And so those words are vitally important. Dictator versus coordinator. I don't know everything. I know a lot. I do. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, but I still don't know everything. I love working with new people because they bring something to the table I may have never thought of before. And I love that. I think it's amazing. You know, when I started working with Monarch 3 years ago, I'd never worked with Rich Henshaw, and it was great. You know, when 10, 12 years ago, when I started doing Clearbrook, I started working with Brian Harnsman, never worked with him before. And it's like, oh, this is awesome. Past few years, I've been working with Ian and John. And all of a sudden, it's like they look at things totally different than I've ever looked at it. Tim Fairbanks, a great friend of mine. We have talks about this. He looks at things differently. Shaw, we do stuff together and we start talking about philosophical things and just those casual conversations. And I learned so much from these guys. And the early years, I would not have been listening to that. Because I was a program dictator. I thought that I knew everything. We were successful. We still didn't know what the hell we were doing. You know what I mean? We were successful because we kind of figured it out just a little bit ahead of everybody else. But just the fact that by opening up and being a true coordinator and talking to my music guys and saying, this phrase should do this and should feel like this, and then just letting them create and do their thing is amazing to me. It's awesome. So that's the biggest thing that I could have probably told my younger self is listen to other people and you don't know everything, asshole.
Absolutely. Don, before we go, the last thing I want to do is I just want to mention you were inducted into the Hall of Fame a few years ago and gave what I thought was a very moving induction speech. And one of the things that you touched on was how important it is to pay things forward. And if there's one thing that you've learned in the activity and really gotten out of the activity beyond just, you know, the clean rolls and the audience standing up and clapping, it would really be that concept of paying it forward. I'm wondering if you could kind of touch on that for the audience that's tuning into this webinar, those that maybe haven't heard you reference some of those things before.
I'm a firm believer in this, and this is something that I've tried to instill in every group that I've ever been in. We love this activity. All of us love this activity. You wouldn't be on this webinar if you did not love this activity. We go to these advisory board meetings, and there's so much love for each other in this activity in the room. It's amazing. You know, everybody working for the same goal. And we are here because there have been people before us that set us up to be here. So I think as teachers, as educators, as directors, as whatever we are, I think it's our responsibility to continue that legacy. I think it's our responsibility to encourage our students to pay it forward, to get involved. Are all of them going to teach drums? No, they're not. Are all of them going to design and be involved in this forever? No, they're not. But one day they're going to have a good job, and maybe they are okay with saying, I'm going to write $100 for the scholarship fund, or I'm going to go volunteer my time of feeding these members on this weekend. I'm just going to go to a show and cheer these guys on. You know, I think there's so many different ways that you can be involved, and I think it's vitally, vitally important. I think it's even more important for the independent groups, because the independent groups, if performers march independent groups, they are obviously more ingrained in this activity than just scholastic groups. The scholastic guys, they love it. Yes, they're all about it. But if you take that effort to go to the next step and be an independent person, odds are you are probably going to do more with this activity. I think it's important that we let them know how to run an organization, how to budget, why the design is the way it is. So oftentimes when I'm working with these teams, I'll go in and say, okay, we're changing this and doing this, and this is why. Because you this, you this, 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 and you help them understand, because if the independent groups in an area are stronger, your scholastic groups are going to be stronger, because that's who's producing your teachers. So I just think it's vitally, vitally important for us to keep this going. And to do that, you have to teach them how to learn. You have to teach them how to think. You have to teach them how to approach things from a design standpoint and from running a business standpoint, because that's what they do. And teach them about relationships, because they may be a scholastic person that's running a scholastic unit, that they have to deal with their band director and that sort of thing. So I just think it's our responsibility as educators, young and old, to continue this going because other people did it for us. And I think it's the most important thing is we do it for other people.
Couldn't say it better myself. You know, Sean Vega talks about this whole activity is based on tribal knowledge. And I've heard him talk about this concept a couple of times where, you know, there's no school for what it is that we do from either a performance standpoint or from a design standpoint. You can't go to school to learn how to be an indoor percussion designer or to really run an indoor percussion ensemble. And so to the extent that we've built up that knowledge base, it's all by learning how it's done from other people. And we're all kind of standing on the shoulders of those that came before us. And I couldn't agree more with Don that anybody that's doing this from a design standpoint or from an educational standpoint at a high level, we have an obligation to share that back with those that are in our ensembles. I think one of the biggest challenges on that note is just carving out the time and giving that the significance and the importance, because it's really easy at this point in the middle of the season. You know, you heard Tom talk about it tonight. It's really easy to be so ingrained in the show and the performance and bring this together. And here's what needs to happen this week to keep everything on track. Just don't forget that the performers are watching everything that we're doing and learning all of those lessons along the way. And to the extent that you can be really purposeful about that and pass that tribal knowledge on, it really helps strengthen and build up our activity that we all love so much. Don, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. This was fantastic. Every time I get to talk with you, I always walk away feeling inspired and kind of renewing my enthusiasm for everything that we're doing. Definitely feel like we're cut from the same cloth. And everybody that tuned in tonight, I hope you felt the same thing. I hope you got the same out of this tonight and were able to borrow some of the great wisdom that Don has been able to pick up over the course of the years. As always, I hope if you see he or I out at the show, come by, say hello, start up a conversation, because he and I both love talking about this stuff, and would be happy to answer any questions anybody has pretty much at any point. Once again, it's all about paying it forward and making sure that you're reaching back and pulling up those that are behind you in the activity.
Well, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody, that's it. We're going to sign off for tonight. We have one more of these webinars that we're going to be doing this year. The next date will be March 28th. Go ahead and mark your calendars on that one. Our guest on that is going to be Richard Kearns. Richard is the percussion director at Burleson Centennial High School in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He and I are going to be talking about kind of an inside look in the Burleson Centennial program. They have had really kind of a meteoric rise in the activity from their debut in Scholastic Open a couple of years ago to now being one of the top ensembles in the Scholastic World Class. So we're going to figure out how that happened and how he brought that to life and kind of get the inside scoop on that program and some of the philosophies there. So I hope you'll be able to join us for that. And again, if you have any questions at any point, you are always welcome to email those in. My email address is Caleb, C-A-L-E-B, @wgi.org. If you've got any questions or any needs from an educational standpoint, always here to help. Again, thank you everybody so much for joining us tonight.